Welcome back. You're watching Today. Now, SMME'S are a big part of South Africa's economy. Funding for them is also crucial as it helps them create jobs. To discuss this, we're joined by Chairperson of the SA Startup Act movement, Matsi Modise, who joins us to speak about some initiatives that are being put in place to assist small businesses. Matsi, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And I suppose the big question here is what is the Startup Act all about, and really how does it advance small and medium businesses operating in a very difficult South African environment at the moment?
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. And I hope everybody's keeping very warm at home. It's quite cold here in Johannesburg. So yes, as indicated, I chair an organization called the Startup Act movement. And it's a bunch of concerned business citizens that run businesses, that invest in businesses, that incubate and accelerate businesses. And we feel that South Africa needs to start having progressive policies that would enable high impact, high growth startups. So I think also it's important to identify or define what a startup is, because, you know, one day you wake up, you have an idea, and then you start a business. But the startups that we refer to are innovation-driven businesses. They are technology or technology-enabled. They're less than 5 years in how old they are, and they're generating less than 100 million. But the important thing to note is that they are very key on pushing technology in South Africa, and also they invest a lot in intellectual property and research and development. And one of the key targets is to grow beyond the borders of South Africa. So if I had to name an example of a startup, I would say Sweep South is one South African startup. Go One is a South African, well, it's a global startup, but also has its roots in South Africa. And also I would say Discovery, but I wouldn't say Discovery is a startup, but we need more discoveries in South Africa. So as the Startup Act movement, we have been engaging the government around policy reform, because South Africa has become quite a costly country with a lot of red tape to be able to enable these startups to grow beyond the borders of South Africa, even to grow within our country, so that they can contribute towards unemployment and also contributing towards the growth of our economy.
That is such an important point that you raised there, Matsi, the contribution that they can make to the economy, but the policy reform that needs to be put in place to ensure that we are seeing bidvests and discoveries and all sorts of these startups turning into authentically South African conglomerates. How does the movement assist in policy reform and really just molding policy in such a way that it creates a conducive environment for small to medium businesses, or startups, if you will?
So we're short of picketing outside of government buildings, but we don't do it in a form of doing or striking, but having constructive interactions with government officials. So this is something that we've been doing since 2014, right? And then in 2020 gained a lot of traction, where we had a conversation with our president, and he was able to understand that South Africa could potentially be a startup nation, because we do have a lot of talent. But unfortunately, that talent is leaving our country because of the policies that we have, because we've made it very costly and cumbersome. So since 2020, luckily, we've been able to get traction, engaging the Office of the Presidency. We've been dealing with the Department of Science and Innovation, the Department of Small Business Development and Home Affairs, because I'll also speak briefly to the reforms that we've recommended. But luckily now, it's not just us having a conversation amongst ourselves as business and as startups, or that startup community. It's now how do we constructively engage the government so that they, for one, understand who we are, what we're trying to achieve, the benefit that we could have to the economy, and what exactly do we need, in essence, from them, so that they could be able to help us as a business community. And it's important to see us as we different to the rest of the businesses. You know, we're not the small moms and pop shops. So we're very much involved in technology. We invest a lot in intellectual property. But what has happened in South Africa is that the transfer of intellectual property has become very cumbersome, right, and onerous. on the startup. So if I am trying to broaden my horizon, I will need investment. So South Africa doesn't have a lot of venture capital happening. I'd have to go outside. And for any venture capitalist coming from outside wanting to invest in a South African or registered IP company, they would have to go through exchange control. And it's quite a costly and onerous process. So we've then engaged the Treasury and said to Treasury, we actually did also meet with the Deputy Minister, Masondo, and we then said to him, like, this is what we mean by some of the reforms that you require. So IP transfer, we have engaged the Minister and said, you guys need to revise and reform that or revise it. And then something to the effect of revising the cumbersome and costly exchange control restrictions imposed on the startups. And then I think also another thing is capital tax gains. In essence, when you are a startup and you're wanting to transfer your IP outside of the country, you're already being charged capital tax gains before you are liquid as a business, before you actually start making money. So we're saying that don't make it easy for our very talented startups to leave South Africa and register their businesses in Mauritius, in Kenya, in Delaware, or anywhere else, because trust me, the rest of the world is making it so attractive for talent like what we have in South Africa to come and establish themselves because they've seen the value that it's had in their own economies.
Yeah, and I mean, you do have different stakeholders, very briefly and finally, if you will, Matsi, like the British High Commission's tech hub that's been established in partnership with South Africa and the opportunities that it presents through funding for businesses in SA. Talk us through that particular partnership, if you will, and the impact that it's made so far with the rounds of funding that have come through it.
So the organization is a nonprofit, and so it basically depends on us putting in our own money, because I have my own company and some of my proceeds are put towards ensuring that we support the startup, the startup community. So then we've been very privileged to have the UK SA Tech Hub to fund the initiatives that we've been doing around policy reform. They've been quite instrumental in ensuring that we have conversations with the government. And I think it's important that everyone plays a role. It shouldn't just be the UK SA Tech Hub. It shouldn't be a few individuals that are contributing money towards ensuring that this very important segment of the economy, which will then produce the likes of the Discoveries, the likes of the Bidvests, we should be able to maintain this talent so that they can feel proudly South African and want to grow proudly South African companies from South Africa. So we've been very privileged to have the UK SA Tech Hub financially contribute, and we are always looking for more partners. So if you are in the technology space and you want to support technology enablement or technology startups to be able to thrive and grow, to contribute towards unemployment and job creation and, positively contributing towards our economy, we would say join the movement. We would say join the startup movement. And if for anybody that's outside who is a startup themselves, who's interested around policy reform, we also would encourage you to join the movement by going to startupact.co.za. And in essence, there's a button that says join the movement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much. You could just tell from our engagement how passionate you are around startups and growing local business in South Africa. And you never know, this tech hub that we have could result in our very own Silicon Valley one day. And Matsi will be watching you very closely, as well as what the movement is doing to advance business in South Africa.